Two, one. All right. Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Fit Pro Show. David here in Houston. We got Emily back with us, which we're really happy about. And I think we have a pretty cool topic today. We talked about training the glutes last week, but we didn't get to intensity techniques for that muscle group or any other muscle group. So today we're going to talk about ways that we can make training a little bit more fun. We can up the intensity on it. And although some of these are kind of, I would call advanced techniques, you don't have to necessarily be an advanced lifter or exerciser to implement some of these things if you're kind of gotten into a rut and you've been doing the same stuff for a long time. So I'm excited to kind of introduce some of these. I think everybody should try out at least one or two of these that we talk about today, because I think it's worth kind of throwing a wrench into it here. But I'll go ahead and get us started on the first one, just on something we're probably all familiar with, just so we have some place to go after this. So when we think about the first one, straight sets of exercises, that's when you're thinking about, 3 or 4 sets of, let's say, like 12 reps. Okay. And that's when we can say we're doing squats. You got 4 sets of 12, and we're going to utilize that, like the reps in reserve or RPE or something like that, that we usually do to make sure that we're working at the right intensity. But that's always the first place that we start. Learn how to do the exercise correctly and getting some straight sets of work, usually with me, with a few reps in the tank. Somewhere between like 1 and 4 reps in the tank is what I do. And then we go to maybe some of the different techniques there. You agree with that, Emily? You want to add anything for the straight sets?
No, yeah, that's usually, or I always start, I shouldn't say usually, that's always where I start with
Yeah.
people. And then, as we're getting more comfortable when they're really nailing down the technique and the form, then we'll start doing some more of these different techniques. But yeah, that's a great baseline. It's also really easy for them to remember too, because at
Mm-hmm.
this point, they're probably like not ready to either log stuff or whatever that might be. So it's easy for them to give them, their homework and be like, okay, this is all 4 sets of 12 to 15 with, like you said, kind of leaving a few in the tank.
Right. Yeah, and I think straight sets is what people do if they don't know probably other techniques, right?
For sure.
It's just, okay, we're getting our 3 sets of 10 in or whatever it is. And that's exactly why I wanted to cover that one first, because that's probably what everybody uses more than anything else, which is not a bad thing at all. I think it's a great place to start. But then we're going to start sprinkling in some of these intensity techniques that we're talking about today. And I brought up the reps in reserve because before we go into any other advanced techniques, talking about failure training, I think it's worth at least talking for a minute or two about it, because taking sets to complete muscular failure for a given exercise is really tough, but it's something that can be used as an intensity technique. What I say with failure training, though, is for any movement pattern or muscle group that you're hitting, I always keep that, if somebody is all about the intensity and they're trying to work hard and they want to take a set to failure, we'll do like 3 straight sets of 10 to 12. And then on that last one, I say, go for it. Right. And I'll make sure, excuse me, that the form is looking great, but that's where we want to push it. Because if we start that failure training on the first set number 2, 3, or 4, you're going to see your performance goes way, way down. So I don't think failure training is a bad thing, but you don't have to use it on every set.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. If you're starting with it that first set, like you said, when you get to the second, third, fourth, you're not gonna have any energy left over, and then that's where your technique starts to fail. So want to make sure that you're doing that kind of towards the end of your sets. And I'm the same way. I even do it with myself and my clients, where we'll do the first 3 sets, to 12, 15, whatever, based on goals, obviously, and then the last set, like, give me all you got, as many as you can.
Yeah. And one of the terms I like to talk about when we talk about failure training or reps in reserve is stimulus to fatigue ratio. Because if you leave a couple of reps in the tank, you're getting 95% of the stimulus that we want, but the fatigue's way lower. Maybe you get that 100% stimulus if you're taking it to failure, but your fatigue is just through the roof and the rest of your workout might suffer. So something to definitely think about when we talk about failure training. So we talked about straight sets of working exercises. We've talked about training to failure. Another one that I use really often that I really love are supersets. And when we talk about these, it can also be called antagonist paired sets, because when we do this correctly, we're thinking about working one muscle and then the muscle opposite of that. So let's say we're doing arms, right? So I'm going to hit biceps first, and then I'm going to superset that with an exercise for triceps right after. The great thing about those opposing muscle groups, one after another, is that you're kind of moving quickly. You're going to be really efficient with your time. So you're getting a lot of great work in, like your exercise density goes up, really efficient with that time. And then you can get more volume in a shorter amount of time. And if you do like that, like an arm superset, and you go back and forth, you're really going to be feeling pumped up. And that's definitely an upside of doing those. So I use supersets a lot. How about you, Emily?
Yeah, I love them. I use them with every workout that I do personally. I just think I love when people are like, well, I don't have an hour to work out. And it's like, well, let's superset, because you can get so much done in a half hour, 45 minutes. I don't have an hour really either sometimes. And so I know I can get a good workout in 45 minutes to a half hour supersetting. It just saves so much time. And then, like David said, you're really going to feel pumped up. So your heart rate's going to be raised a lot. And it's going to be almost like a conditioning thing too. So, having that heart rate up the entire time, and you're not kind of just sitting around in between sets, making conversation, looking at yourself in the mirror, whatever. Yeah, it's one way to just like save on time, and you get a really good workout. And it's also a great way to just like break up your workouts. If you only have 3 days a week, it's a great way. Okay, I'm gonna do arms, I'm gonna do chest and back, and then legs and shoulders, or whatever it might be. So you can split it up however you want. But yeah, this is probably one of my favorite ways to train.
Yeah, and just a point about how you would maybe set this up, because we both agree that we love supersets and use them a lot. It's probably a little bit easier with the upper body to do that. That's why I gave you that arm. We can do front and the back of the arms. You can do like chest and back supersets, maybe front of the shoulders, rear delts, something like that. But it's really hard when you go into like the multi-joint muscle groups in the lower body to like just hit quadriceps and just hit hamstrings. It's still doable, but a little bit tougher to do that. So just something I wanted to bring up, but I think they're great. And another one that I think is good and is very similar to supersets are compound sets. So we talk about supersets working one muscle and then that antagonist muscle on the other side. If you do a compound set, that means that we're hitting the same muscle group. So that agonist muscle that's getting hit, so we can keep it with the biceps, right? We're doing one exercise, and then right after that, you're doing an exercise for that same muscle group. So if we use like the pecs, the chest, you're doing a set of push-ups, right, for your allotted intensity or sets that or reps that you need. And then right after that, you're going into like a chest fly maneuver. So it's really cool, because if you want to just blow out certain muscle groups and really get a big pump going, it's a really good way to do that. What I would say though, from a performance standpoint, it drops really fast, because you just don't have any rest with that muscle group that you're using. But it's another one that's kind of like the failure, a good finisher for people. Do you agree?
Yeah, definitely. I was gonna ask you what you thought of like the downfalls of them. But yeah, that I completely agree with that. Just keep that in mind when you're deciding, setting up your training. Just keep that in mind.
Yeah. So supersets, compound sets, really cool ways that we can get really efficient, effective workouts in, get great pumps, get that cellular swelling that we're talking about. It makes you feel good. As Emily was talking about, if you're checking yourself out in the mirror, you might be taking your selfies after doing some of those sets right here. And that's what's kind of cool about the intensity techniques. But as we go into some of the other ones, another one that I have on my list are descending sets or down sets.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So what I have for that is like, either the weight or the reps are descending with this one. That's how I look at it, at least.
Yep.
And that's why it's great. I'm going to pass it over to Emily after I give this example. Let's say you pick a weight that you're working with. So you're squatting, you got 200 pounds on your squat or whatever, and you do your first set of 12, and then you keep that weight on the bar. And, if you're working pretty hard, maybe that goes down to 10 reps on the second set, 8 reps on the third set, but you're using that same allotted weight that you had. Another way to do it, if you're more concerned with keeping the reps around the same area, because obviously different reps mean different things. If we're real low rep, we're going to be working in that strength range. If we're kind of in the mid, we're working for size. If it's higher reps, we're working endurance. If you want to keep it at a certain rep range, let's call it 12 for hypertrophy right now, then maybe you do that 200 for 12, and then you drop down to 190 for 12 again, and 180 for 12 again. That's just another way that you can keep that same rep range, but you can descend those sets along the way.
Yeah, definitely. And then it just opposite of that is ascending, right? So you
Yep.
can do that the same thing with the reps or the weight. So remember when we talked about straight sets earlier, that was the first thing we talked about. The next thing you could do, from there is obviously add weight to each set. So you have 4 sets, you start at 200, maybe you add 210, 215, whatever it is.
Yeah.
So that's just the opposite of descending. But I do like this because I think it saves on your recovery. So you're not going to be torn up the next day. In 2 days, 2 or 3 days, if you want to train that muscle group again, you're not going to be completely worn out or torn up. And just like, I don't know, coming from a recovery and like safety standpoint, I think it's just smart to do. It gives your joints, less taxing on them. So
Yeah, really good point. And you can kind of mix and match those things too. Like if you can do descending and ascending. If you think about like a triangle, we've done things like that where you do like, I don't know, 10, 8, 6, and then you go from 6, 8, 10
and
again. So you're getting multiple reps. You're still in that strength rep range on your top set. But if you want strength and you also want a little bit more size, a little bit more muscle, you're getting that great work at those other ones too. And it can be motivating for some people to do something in between those sets, like load another weight or whatever it may be. So it's not just, oh, I have 5 sets of 8 with the same weight and I'm twiddling my fingers in between, right? So
right.
it can be a mental thing as well.
Yeah, I think from there we should go to drop set because I think people get those two kind of mixed up.
Let's do
And
it.
so drop set is performing, a certain amount of weight and then immediately dropping to a lower weight and continuing with that exercise. So let's take curls, for example. I'm curling at 50 pounds and I'm doing as many reps as I can or a certain amount of reps if you kind of have something in mind. And then I'm dropping the weight. This kind of depends too on goals of like how much you're dropping it. I would say, I don't know, if you read stuff online, they're going to say, I think anywhere from 5 to 40. I would say 10 to 20% is good. And that's usually what I do. So dropping that weight from that 10 to 20% from 50, and I'm picking it right back up and I'm going again. And I'm going until I get down to 0 and I can't do anymore. And if you haven't done this before, it is a crazy feeling. It's a crazy pump feeling. I remember doing it the first time back in high school. And I mean, you get done with those curls and you're just dead. Your biceps are exhausted. you have that minimal rest period. So just know the only amount of rest that you have is you changing that weight. So normally when I do these, I pick dumbbells or a cable machine. So I'm not taking a lot of time to re-rack the weight
Mm,
on, a barbell. But if you have a partner, this is good to have a partner with normally. Um, and then, you're going to get, this is more for like the size thing when
mhm.
you're kind of shooting for size, but it can also be used to build strength and endurance. But you get more wow, I can't talk, more motor units recruited and fatigued. So you're just, you're really building up that size in you. So what I always tell people too is like, to start hard. I don't know if you would say the same thing, David,
Mhm.
but I always, tell them like, yeah, go hard, but also, just know that when you get to 5 pounds, it's gonna feel like 50 because you were just working so hard throughout those other sets at a way higher weight. Um, and like David said earlier, your rep range is going to depend on what you're shooting for. So, those lower 1 to 6, 1 to 8, more strength, 6 to 15s, more size, and then anything 8 and up is that more endurance.
Yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
the
Yeah.
one thing
And
I do want to add to really quick is the bad thing about this. I know we've been talking about a lot of the pros, but the cons is um, overtraining and people using it too often. So just kind of be conscious of that. If I'm doing this, I might save it for like the last, if I'm doing biceps for the day, arms or whatever, I might do it for my last set of biceps and triceps. Just knowing that I'm not going to tire myself out, and just knowing that I'm really going to go hard for this last set.
yeah, and I think you can say that about almost every technique that we're going to talk about today, is that you want to periodize these in a way where it's not every set that you're doing, every workout needs to be some advanced intensity technique. It's a great way to break things up and really get after it, but if you do it every single time, yeah, there's some of those downfalls that Emily just talked about. So a great way to do this is, on that exercise again. I said it for other ones, that final set, you're going to drop that, you're going to do your working set, drop your weight. I'm in agreement about 10 to 20%. That's not, a perfect number, but it's probably what I use the most. And we've been given a lot of examples. If you're in an actual gym, if you're not in an actual gym, it can be anything, like you're picking up something around the house for a weighted lunge, right? And then on that last set, you want to do a body weight lunge or something like that. There's many ways to make it work.
Yeah, definitely. Cool. I want to hear you talk about cluster sets because I don't really use this that much in my own training. I've used it specifically with certain guys that I've trained that wanted to train that way.
Mhm.
So yeah, I'd like to hear your opinion on it.
I actually don't have much experience with
Oh, okay.
cluster sets, but I do think it's an interesting thing. Something that's kind of similar that I have more experience with is kind of like myo reps. Not to jump ahead too much, but although I think clusters are good, speaking from my experience doing myo reps with a first set of somewhere in, like, let's say 10 to 20 reps, right? And then the following sets after that, instead of resting however long it takes for you to get those 10 to 20 reps again, you only rest enough time to get about 5 or 10 reps. And then you can repeat that multiple times. And it kind of goes without saying, on something like that, it's better for single joint exercises. So it's way easier to do that if you're doing a leg extension and you don't have to worry about your spine caving in or anything like that. It's just kind of a controlled environment where you're hitting one muscle group. I wouldn't try anything like that on a like barbell back squat or something like that. I do think that's a really good one. But if you have anything that you want to say about either my reps or cluster sets, I'm here for it.
Yeah, no, I was just really gonna tell people what they are,
Okay.
just if they've never heard them. But yeah, so cluster set is just that single rep performed in a row, with a shorter rest period in between reps. So let's say you're doing a back squat at 250 for 1 rep, rest, 250 for 1 rep, rest,
Yeah.
250 for 1 rep. Like I said, I don't really normally we're going heavy weight here.
Mhm.
So just think about that. And then the rep range is going to kind of depend again um, on that goal. But the rest period is normally what, like 10 seconds to I'd say 40, depending on again how heavy we're going.
Mhm.
Um, I'd say the benefits, I guess you could get more reps in at that scheduled weight. So if you didn't want to ascend or descend, um, you can get more in. It's going to be more time consuming.
Yeah.
Know that you're
Yeah.
not going to be able to hit a lot of different exercises and a lot of different muscle groups when you're training this way. And it just, I guess, the one thing I do really like about it is that it allows you to get good quality reps at a certain amount of weight that you want to train. So, the biggest thing I hate seeing is when people are trying to do something really heavy and a lot of reps of it and their form starts to go horrible and they'll
Mhm.
just continue it and without even realizing that in the end this isn't actually going to be helping you, it's going to be inhibiting you. So
Yeah.
um and then just the downfall of this one really is I think people really not understanding the purpose and improper programming when it comes to this one. um so that's kind of why I wanted to say something about it. Like I said, I don't really have that much experience about it. I've done it a few times. But yeah, just kind of wanted to throw that out there so people knew.
Yeah, that's a good one. It's one that you don't hear about so much, but that's kind of what the show's about, is to give everybody ideas here. And I would love to hear in the chat box maybe if any of y'all have done any of the techniques that we've talked about, whether it's clusters or myo reps or supersets or failure training, down sets. Obviously, probably most of us have done straight sets before. But another one that might be new to people, but I think is a pretty cool one, would be pre-exhaustion. And this is when you do one exercise, and that one is usually just a single joint movement, right? So again, if we're keeping it with lower body, something like a leg extension or something like that, and then you follow those straight sets. Let's say you do 4 sets of 15 with a leg extension, and then after that is when you go into your squats to build those quads up. Usually if you're working with a trainer and you're doing a lower body day or emphasis, you're going to do the squats, the deadlifts, the leg presses earlier, because it's the bigger muscle joint, the bigger muscle groups, multi-joint movements go first usually. But what this can do, one of the positives, is it kind of helps with that mind muscle connection. So if you do squats, but you just feel it in your glutes and you don't really feel it in your thighs at all, then doing a single joint exercise that fires up the quadriceps, now you have that connection, and maybe you feel it a little bit because first they're fatigued, and second you just did 4 sets of a certain muscle group. So that's one of the really great things about it. One of the bad things is obviously it's going to hinder your performance, because if you do 4 sets of 15, that's 60 reps with your quadriceps. It's obviously going to take a little bit of a toll from that local muscle group that we just hit.
Yeah, definitely. This is something that I, within the past couple of years, started implementing, and it's great. It's a great workout, but specifically with clients that I've seen that, yeah, lack that muscle connection, um, it just fires it up even more, and it's easier for them to be like, wow, I actually feel that.
Mhm.
And I think, yeah, you can get great results from it. Just know you're going to be pretty exhausted. And so I just kind of plan strategically of what I'm going to do first, what I'm going to pair that with, and so on.
Right. Yeah, you definitely have to have a strategy behind these things, but when you do, it can be kind of fun to change it up. And something that we have talked about in the past, speaking of changing things up, is changing up kind of the speed of different reps that you're doing. So when we're thinking about tempo changes from how fast we're moving, that's a really cool way to kind of overload without changing your reps or the amount of weight that you're using, anything like that. You're just kind of doing those. The one that I use the most is those controlled eccentrics when we're going down into a squat or whatever it is. Whenever you're lengthening the muscle group that you're using, that's when you want to slow it down, and that's going to result in more damage, which is a good thing as long as we recover. And it kind of can help form sometimes, because a lot of times I have to slow people down as opposed to having to speed people up when they're doing exercises. So kind of owning whatever movement pattern we're working in by doing a 3-second eccentric instead of a 1-second eccentric can be really cool.
Yeah, I have a great like memory in college, probably my freshman year. I was working out with a buddy, and I was doing a little bit of that, but I also was just doing a set that was just kind of a little bit slower. And he was like, wow, you girls work out so slow. And I'm like, you should try it. Like, it's actually going to be really hard. And he like did, and he was like, oh, wow. And then, just talking later on, we're like, all right, do you understand why? And he was like, yeah, now I do. But yeah, it's probably one of my favorite things to do. Again, like all of these techniques are for different results, right? Like we kind of talked about, and then just changing things up. Like I am so I just hate being in a rut and doing the same thing. I don't like that personally, professionally. And so for me, it's always like, okay, how can I change this up to make it more fun and just challenge my body in different areas?
Yeah, really good thing to do. Now we talked about the eccentric portion of that, and you implement that, I implement that, and I almost never use it on when we're actually doing the pushing motion. Do you ever slow down that portion of the exercise?
No.
Yeah.
I don't.
I
Yeah.
just don't
I
think
don't
that you're
see why.
getting anything out
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
From a recruitment, from a force development standpoint. So if you change the tempo up, make sure that it's the tempo from when you're going down into the squat or when you're going back into that chest press or whatever it may be. And you don't have to worry about going slow as you're forcibly pushing up, just that
Yeah.
eccentric.
I think that's like one of my favorite too memories of when I first started out training people, and people wouldn't like, they always thought that like pushing the weight was really where you were doing the work. And it was so fun to explain. It was like, no, it's all about the eccentric. And they're
Yeah.
like, wait, what? This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
But when you explain it like that, it's like, no, yeah, it's really, really hyper focused on when you're going down.
Yeah.
So
So you can move faster on that concentric movement when everything's kind of coming together, but when you're pulling that muscle group apart, that's when we want to be slow. And then the last thing for a tempo change would just be holds. And I use isometric holds for a lot of people too, and learning the squat and lunge and things like that. And I think it just kind of helps learn that position too, because somebody can kind of go fast into that squat and think that they have the range of motion down, but then when you tell them to hold that for a few seconds, you see them start wobbling around.
yeah, and I think they just like you said, feel everything a lot
Yeah.
more when you have them pause in that, and they're like, oh man, instead of just hurrying up through it. So
Right.
yeah.
Cool. Well, I think we got time for one more. I would like to hit rest pause, because this is one that I've done and it's really, really tough. We talked about how tough the drop sets are. I think this one gives it a run for its money. If you would do your set just like you would start with your straight sets, right? And then you rest up, I would say about 20 seconds. It might be a little bit less, a little bit more, about 20 seconds, maybe 15 to 30. And then you do the same exercise, usually with the same weight, pretty much to failure. So let's say you're doing a incline dumbbell press, you get all your reps in, and then you have 20 seconds, which anybody that's exercised knows that 20 seconds is not much at all, especially if that was a tough set. And then you use the same weight that you just did and see how many reps you can get. If you got 10 the first set, then you're going to be doing good if you get 5 on that second one.
Yeah, definitely. I like this one too. It really challenges your ego and just challenges yourself, which is great. But and with any of these, when we're talking about like, because some of these are really focused on the breaks, right? So
Mhm.
timing out your breaks. One of the best things just to have by your side is a stopwatch, because like David said, you think 20 seconds has gone by, but it was probably really more like 40 to a minute. It's
Mhm.
easy to let by. And you don't want to be sitting there one Mississippi too. So get yourself a stopwatch, use your phone, whatever it is, if you really want to be precise with this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and you should, and we do cube fit classes like this with high intensity intervals or with different types of circuits and boot camps and stuff like that. So it's a really good thing to start, even if you don't use any of these techniques, is seeing how long you're resting in between sets
Yeah.
and things like that. Because when you play around with that, especially if you don't have that much equipment right now, that's something that you can do that easily overloads your work, and so you can get better. Awesome, everybody. Well, I really enjoyed this one. It's fun to talk about some of those higher level things, and I think it's something that just about everybody on here can probably utilize. So I think I'll probably start using some of these and some of my classes a little bit. I know I do with my clients, but it's good to kind of open everybody's eyes to these. But I hope you have a great rest of your day, and we're going to be back next Thursday for another Fit Pro show. Thanks for joining, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.